Pet Simulator 99 uses its free rewards system to make people play for nearly 1 hour every session. Today, I'm going to teach you to script PetSim's exact free rewards system to use in your game. I'll also show you how PetSim uses 2 tricks to make its free rewards better than 99% of other games. To make this system, I completely recreated PetSim 99's UI. If you want to use PetSim's UI, watch my tutorial on how to make it. You can click up here or it's also linked below. Let's get started by making 2 scripts. First, we need a local script, and we're going to call this script rewards. Delete that hello world. And the next thing we need is in server script service, we just need a server script. Okay, we're going to call this rewards manager. Now, the reason we need 2 here is because we do not want the client to just be able to decide what rewards it gets and when it gets them. We need the server, this server script, to manage that and to decide when and where players are allowed to get their rewards and what their rewards are. So let's get started in this script here. We're going to plan it out here. We're going to need a few services. We're probably going to need some references to stuff. And then we're going to need a bunch of different functions. And going into this, there's a few things I know that we're going to need. We're going to need a function to request a reward from the client or from the player. Okay, so we're going to need client requests reward function, and then in this function we're going to decide if they're allowed to claim the reward that they've requested they get. We're going to need to do some stuff when the player is added to the game. We're also going to need to do some stuff when the player is removed from the game. So let's get started by adding some services here up top. The first thing we need to do is get the data store service. This service is how we're going to remember what exactly the player has claimed already, how long they've been in the game, and whether it's the same day or they've come back the next day, in which case we want the rewards to reset for them. We're also going to need to get the player's service. This is how we're going to know when the player leaves and joins the game. And we'll also get replicated storage. This is so we can get some remote events, and then we can fire back and forth. We can have the player request a reward. We can have the server tell the player if they get the reward, etc. So down in the references, the first thing we want to get is that remotes folder from replicated storage that we created a little while ago. And then we need to be able to store the data. There's a bunch of different tutorials on the data store service that you can go find. I'm probably going to make one of these days. If I have, I'll link it in this video. But for now, we're just going to do a simple version of using the data store service. So we're going to get a new data store here. We're going to call it just the rewards data store. And we'll get it by saying data store service, get data store. We'll get the data store player data. And I'm realizing there's a problem up here, data store service. I typed in replicated storage for some reason. We want data store service. We don't want 2 different references to replicated storage. The next reference we're probably going to need is a list of what the rewards are. So we're going to get some reward info typed out here, and let's format it correctly. We're going to say the format of this is for each reward, we're going to write down how many seconds it's going to take for the player to be in the game to unlock that reward, and then the amount of money they get from choosing the reward. So we're going to say reward info is a new table, and in this table we'll say, for example, reward 1 equals its own table. Okay, and this is where the format comes in here. We'll say the first variable of this is going to be, let's say, 30 seconds, and we're going to give them 5 gold for that. So I'm going to go through and populate out this table. Okay, so I've populated this out, and what I've done here is said there's going to be 12 rewards, so there's 12 entries in the table. And then for each reward, instead of typing out an actual number of seconds, I thought it might be easier to type out minutes and then multiply it by 60. So for this first one, that's 30 seconds. We're going to type out 0.5 multiplied by 60 seconds. That way, instead of having to know 11 times 60 number of seconds for the 12th reward, it's just 11 minutes. And so we type in the number of minutes here, number of seconds there. And as time goes on, the reward gets more valuable, and also the length of time it takes to claim the reward increases. Eventually, this will be a lot more. This will be like 3 hours or something. So this would be like 180 minutes at the end. But we want to be able to test and make sure the system works as we're building it out. So we'll leave this as shorter times for now. We're going to come down here and also create another table of player data. This is going to store the data of the active players in the server. One thing we don't want to do is make a million requests to the data store, so we'll just store it in here, and we'll get to this a little bit later. And let's also create a variable here that is not going to change. It's going to be a constant variable, and that's going to equal the number of seconds that there are in a day. So that number is 24 hours times 60 minutes per hour times 60 seconds per minute. Really easy way of writing this down here. And then let's get down here and start to work on these functions. So the first thing, we're actually going to start with these player added and player removed. And before we do anything, we need some event connections down here at the very bottom of the script. So the first thing we need is players.playerAdded. So this is an event connection that returns the player that joins the game. We also want one for player removing here. This also returns the player that's leaving the game. And so we'll create the structure for a few functions here and then plug those in. So we'll say local function player added, and then we will connect it to this event down here. And then we'll also say local function player removing, and then we will connect it to this event down here. Now within this, we also want it to pass in the player, of course. So we'll pass in the player, and we'll type check it here with a colon and say this has to be a player. That way we can have the code autocomplete suggestions and things that we perform on the player, which is just so useful. And the last thing we're going to want here is actually to come into replicated storage remotes. And in this UI folder, we're going to create a remote event. This we are going to call request reward. So this is going to get fired from the client, and it's going to fire to the server and say, hey, I'm requesting to cash in this reward. And then on the server, we're going to check, is the client allowed to claim this reward? And if so, we'll give the reward to them. In this case, it'll be some amount of gold. So we'll create that event right there and then get a reference to it by saying remotes.ui.requestReward.onServerEvent. We want to connect it to a new function, and we need to create that function up here. We'll go local function request reward right there. And don't type in a 0, just create it like that. Down here, we'll request reward, connect it right there. And now we have the structure for this all set up, and we can get started on writing the logic behind it. Once we pass in, again, the player that is requesting a reward right here. So we know what the structure of this rewards manager is going to look like. We'll have it do some stuff when the player joins and leaves, like get their info from the data store and save their info to the data store. And then we'll allow the player to request a reward when they click on one of the reward buttons in the UI page. But we need to set that up on the client side. So let's get started on that. So up here at the top, we'll get a few services before we start anything else. Of course, we need replicated storage. So we'll set that to game get service replicated storage. And we're also going to need tween service again here. Game get service tween service. There we go. We're going to need some references here. I don't know what all of them will be yet, but one of them will definitely be remotes. So we'll get that right now, replicated storage.remotes. And then we'll come down here a little bit further and plan out the functions that we want to use. So the first function we're going to need is one that we can give it a number of seconds and it will return a timer. Like you can see on Pet Simulator, they just have a number of seconds that's counting down there, and it returns it in a readable clock format. So we'll create a function that returns time in a readable format. We're also going to need a function that updates the info for one reward, and we're going to want one that updates the info for all of the reward. So we'll do a bulk update info for all rewards. But we know when we're here on the local side, we want to be able to spawn in buttons when the player joins the game. We want those buttons to be able to be clicked and send something to the server script asking to claim a reward. And we also want it to update the timers on the local side and display something on the button when the player has already claimed a reward. So we kind of have a structure for what this script is going to look like. But to make it a little bit more clear, let's come back to the server here. And the first thing we need to do is when the player joins the game, we want to send over to the player a list of all the rewards that the player can claim. So the first thing we want to do when a player joins the game is get that player's reward data. We're going to do this by performing a get call on the data store. So this is going to be a protected call, a p call, local success and data equals p call function, and then this function is just going to return the rewards data store, get async, and we're going to save keys like this. We're going to save player underscore and then concatenate it with the player user ID. It's important to save your keys like this in your data store so that if a player ever wants to delete their data from your game and they do a request to do that, you can easily find it. And then we're just going to check and see if this data store call was successful by checking if success equals true. Then we want to do some stuff with that data that we've gotten. Now there's a few cases that can emerge here already. If it's someone's first time joining the game, so if we have a new player joining, they're not going to have any data saved to the data store. So in this case, if data is nil, we know it's going to be a new player. I'll move this comment inside this if statement here. But if the data does exist, then we know it is a returning player who's played before, and so they might have played before today also. So we need to get that data and do something different with it. So if data equals nil, then what we want to do is set data to a new table here. So the first value in this table that we want the player to have is how much money they have. If they're a brand new player, they start with 0 money, so that's pretty easy. We want to know what the last login day they had was. So if they logged in yesterday and they're logging in today for the first time, we want to know what the last day they logged in was. So that way we can reset their playtime rewards. So what we're going to do here is do math.floor. We're going to use os.time. What this does is returns the number of seconds it's been since 1970, apparently. So that's just kind of how computers work. It's kind of funny, but you got to do your calculations depending on that, which is why we have this constant that is seconds in a day. So this is the number of seconds since 1970. Divide that by seconds in the day, and then this math.floor will round it down, and that tells us what day it is. In this case, I think today is like day 16,700 something, but it's essentially just the number of days it's been since 1970, and we can compare that to itself to know what the last day a player logged in was. Then we'll get the login time here. We want to know what time a player logged in, so that's just going to be the exact number of seconds it was. And then the last thing we want here is to store a table of the rewards that they've already claimed and the ones that they haven't claimed yet. So in this case, rewards is going to be an empty table. And for example, we're going to set 1 to its own little table here. Now there's a bunch of errors here, and that's actually because I've forgotten a comma up here. Every value in a table like this needs to have a comma separating it from the next one. So if you're getting a bunch of weird error lines pop up, make sure and check that you have all of your commas plugged in. So up here we have some reward info, but we don't actually want to put this same amount of info in because, like on Pet Simulator, you don't actually know how much money or what the reward you're going to get is from the daily rewards. You just know you're going to get something. And that's a key design element of that because it makes you kind of excited to see what it is you're going to get. It could be something different every time. So instead, all of this data right here, the player is going to end up seeing because we're going to send this through to the client's script. So all we want to store in here is whether or not the player has claimed this reward, so reward 1. And in this case, remember, it's a new player, so they haven't, so that's going to be false. And we also want to say how much time is left for them to wait until they can claim that. This is how we create the timer that's going to be counting down on each button. So on this, we'll put in reward info of 1 of position 1 again. Okay, so this is going to be referencing in reward info for the first reward and how much time it's going to take for the player to unlock that reward. So in this case, 30 seconds. So on rewards 1, we're saving, no, they haven't checked it. It's going to take 30 more seconds of them waiting before they can claim this reward. So now I'm going to go through and fill in the rest of these right here. Okay, so I filled these in. Essentially in Pet Simulator, there are 12 rewards. So we have 12 right here. The player is a new player, so they haven't claimed any of them yet. And on each one, we've passed in reward info. And then this is the number of rewards that we're on. and then this is how much time the reward is going to take to unlock. Okay, and then the last step of inside this new player section is we want to set our player data, this table up here that stores it all within this script. We want to set player data of this player's user ID to this big data table we just created. Now, if it's a returning player, we don't need to do that much work. All we need to do is set data of login time, which already exists because they're not a new player. We want to set that to the current time that the player is logged in at. And then we're just going to do this same thing right here. We're going to grab this and paste it down here to store that data locally on the server. Okay, so now that we've checked if it's either a new player or a returning player, we're going to come down a little bit further here. And now we're going to check if it's been over 1 day. So the way we can do that is by doing the same calculation here to find the current day that it is. So that's going to be math.floor. We're going to round down the current time divided by the total number of seconds in a day. And then we can do another check right here. We can say if the current day is the same as player data of the player that that's in question, dot last login day, then it is the same day again that the player is logging in on. So therefore we want to do nothing because all of this data is going to be up to date. This is one of PetSim's tricks. Clemency means they forgive players if they leave and come back in the same day and let them keep progressing towards their free rewards. Most games are just going to delete all of your progress if you leave and come back. But if the current day is actually greater than the player's last login day, which we'll grab from right here, then it is a new day. So we want to put a new table of rewards. It's not going to be too hard to set that. We can actually just come up here and grab this whole thing right here. Actually grab all of this data that we already typed in here. So we'll copy that and then we'll say player data of player's user ID here dot rewards, because that's the value we're setting it as, equals this new table. Okay, so let's go over what we've done so far. We've checked if they're a new player and given them a new data store entry if they are. If not, if they're a returning player, we've just updated the last time they've logged in. And then we've checked if it's the same day and the player's logged in multiple times today, or we've checked if it's a new day and the player's rewards need to get reset, and we've done that right here. So the last thing we need to do is actually fire this data through to the client. And when we do that, then on the client side, we can check and we can get started running the timers, creating the buttons, doing all the local effects for the playtime system. So before we fire this data through, actually, we need a remote event. So we'll create a new remote event in this UI folder. We have one for requesting a reward, but we actually need one that is going to bulk update rewards. And we also are going to duplicate that. We're going to name this duplicated one update money, because we'll fire that through right here as well. So here in the script, we're going to say remotes.ui.bulk update rewards, fire client. We're going to fire that through to the player here. And then what we are going to fire through to this specific player is their own rewards table here. So when we type this in, this is going to send this whole chunk of data straight through to the client. And then right underneath this, we'll say on this update money event, we'll also fire this to the same player. And what we're going to do is fire through almost the same thing. We'll send through their player data, but just their money value. This should be almost all set up here. What we've done is we've gotten the data, we've checked if they're a new player and put a new data entry, and then we've checked if it's a current day to reset their data, and then we've sent all of that through to the player. Last thing to do here is just to create an else right here, because all of this is under if success is true, but if success failed, if this reward data store didn't work for some reason, we just want to know that so we can figure out what's going on. So here we're just going to type out a little warning if it failed. We're just going to say error with rewards data store. It is for player, and then we type in the key that was using, and then we can check if that user data has corrupted or something. But that's going to be it for this player added function right here. So let's follow this function to where it needs to go. The first place is bulk update rewards. So if you remember in this local script over here, we did create a skeleton. We want a function here in this local script that updates all of the rewards. So let's create local function bulk update rewards here. And then let's make sure we've got this connected to that remote event we just created. So we'll go remotes.ui.bulk update rewards. On client event, we want to connect it to our bulk update rewards function. And remember what we passed through here was that big data table. So we'll just make sure that's right there. And what we actually want this to do, I'm going to update this comment here. What we want this to do is create or refresh all reward buttons and data that we have here. So here on this page, we don't have any reward buttons yet, but what this function is going to do is create all of those reward buttons. So if we want to clone a bunch of buttons here, we're actually going to need a reference to this button that we created and put in replicated storage. So we're going to say local prefab button equals replicated storage dot objects wait for child reward claim. And then up here, so we know where to clone it to, we'll also get the local GUI, same as we did in the window helper. It is script.parent.parent. And then we'll get a few other references here. Namely, we'll get the rewards window, which should be GUI wait for child rewards. We'll also get the rewards button. Remember, this is the button that opens up the rewards window. And then lastly, we'll actually get the button holder that we created here. So in this window, the buttons don't just go directly underneath it. Remember, they go in this buttons frame and then in their proper row. So we'll get a reference to just that as a button holder, which will be the rewards button. And we'll just wait for that child buttons. We do want a variable here in this script that saves all of the reward info that we get sent through. So we'll create an empty table here. And then the first thing we'll do in data here is we'll say reward info equals that data table that we just got sent through. We're also going to want to have a table here that stores all of the buttons we create. So that way we can refresh the buttons, and if it becomes a new day and we send over a new amount of data, it just deletes all the buttons that are there and creates new ones. So we'll say local buttons equals a blank table again. And then if something already exists in those buttons, we'll loop through them all. So we'll loop through all in iPairs buttons here. And what we will do is we'll just destroy that old button and it'll make room for us to create a new button. So we'll start by looping through. We're going to say for I info in iPairs data. We want to do the following. We're going to set in this empty button table now, that's empty, that we've destroyed everything if it was there. We're going to set buttons of I, which in the first loop is just going to be 1, to a clone of the prefab button. We're going to set the name of this also, and we'll just set that to reward of I. So now we need to set the text of this timer that is on the button, because sometimes if it's a returning player, maybe they've already claimed that first reward, and so we just want it to automatically get set to the claimed state. So just so you guys can see what's going on here, I'm just going to copy and paste all of this data out of the server script, and we're going to create a temporary thing right here. We're going to go local temp table, and we're going to paste this in here, because remember, this is what the data is going to look like that we fire through. So we're just going to do this so we can easily see what it is that we're manipulating here. So the first thing we're going to do is if info of position 2 here is less than or equal to 0, then. So info is going to be this table stored right here, and this is position 1 and 2. We're going to check if the time remaining on this specific reward is 0 or is less than 0 somehow. And in that case, we've finished the countdown already. So we know that either the reward needs to be claimed or it's already been claimed. Right here, what we're doing is just setting the timer text. So we can check if it's already been claimed or not by checking this value. So we'll say if info of 1 equals true, then the reward's already been claimed. So all we need to do right here is get the button that we just cloned. We need to take the timer right here, and we're just going to set the text to this checkmark emoji right here, which you can copy and paste online, or it's in the description of this video also. You can just copy it from there and paste it in. We're going to want some way of tracking how many have been claimed. So I'm going to put a little to-do here and say track claimed. We'll get back to this in a little bit. So otherwise, we're going to check if info of 1 equals false. So in this case, this specific reward is ready to be claimed. So we're going to set the text to something different than this done emoji here. What we're going to do is set it to redeem. So this will say, hey, click on me and redeem this reward. Then again, right here, we're going to go to do, we're going to want to check how many buttons are ready. And then the last thing we'll do just right in here is actually tell this button what to do when we click on it by saying button.mouseButton1click one time, because we know it's ready. We want to just fire this remote over to the server, request that reward from the server. So we'll fire it through, and we're going to pass through I, because I is the number of reward that we're requesting for the server to give us. Timer text is set. So now let's set the image ID of the button. In Pet Simulator, there are different images that it uses depending on how valuable the reward is. So we'll use different images here as well. This is another trick Pet Sim uses. If you don't know exactly what you're going to get when you unlock your free reward, it adds a lot of anticipation because you're curious as to what it'll actually be. You just know it'll be something valuable. So if something is on the first row here, we're going to set it to the least valuable image. The way we can check that is by checking if I is greater than 0 and it's less than or equal to 4, because there's going to be 4 things on the first row. Then we can also check else if I is greater than 4 and I is less than or equal to 8. It'll be on the second row and should have the second most valuable image. And then we'll also check if it's on the third row here, but there are 2 different images on the third row. So we'll say if I is less than 8 and I is greater than 8 and I is less than or equal to 10. And then we'll do the last one here, else if I is greater than 10 and I is less than or equal to 12, which is the last image rarity, you could say. So these are the 4 images we're going to be using for the buttons. And what we're going to do is store the IDs up here as references at the top of this script. So we'll say like ID1 equals, and then we'll paste an image ID here. And these image IDs, which I'm about to type in, you guys can copy out of the description of this video, or they're also up here on screen if you just want to pause and type these in. And again, all of these are from the Vector Icon pack. I cannot recommend that pack enough. It's definitely a lot easier for you guys if you go buy that, and then you have access to all of the images from that super easily. So I've got all the IDs in there, and now we're just going to come back down here and set the ID of the button. So it's pretty easy to do that. Again, we have the button right here in buttons. Then we can just set the image of it to ID1. Let me drop a comment here so we can keep it clear of what we're doing. Right here we are setting the image ID and button and the button parent, because we also know what row it's going to be in right here. That's what we're checking. So we can also just say buttons of I.parent equals, this is where the button holder comes in, row 1. So now we're just going to copy this and paste it in all of these and then just tweak these numbers here. So it's going to be ID 2, 3, and 4. And then also if it's in the second one, it'll be row 2. And if it's in either of these third ones, it's going to be row 3. And that should be it for the bulk updating rewards. This will create new buttons. We can, I believe, give this a shot. Okay, and then I hit play here, and there's an error right down here, which you guys might run into also, which is that I actually can't access the data store. So I'm going to close out of this, and the reason that is just because of a game setting here. So I'm going to come to Home, Game Settings, Security, and then just click Enable Studio Access to API Services. If you don't check that, your game can't actually access the data store. So pressing play again. Now we can see if we open this up, there's still nothing there. So I tried playing it again and there was another error here because I made another typo up top here in the local script. So come check and make sure you didn't make this typo also. There's an infinite yield here because I mistyped rewards button here. What this should be at this position is rewards window. It was checking under the button for this button holder, not the window. So I tried to play again. There's also this other error here that you guys are also going to run into. It's because of this temporary table. So we're just going to toggle that all as a comment and then press play again. And now there's no errors here in the output, which is looking good. And if we open this up, we can see it's created all of the buttons that we're going to need. So the next thing we have to check here is that right now it's not possible for the player to claim a reward because we fire through to the server that we want to claim one, we're requesting one, but on the server's end, we actually haven't filled out this function yet. So this is the next step right here. Now player is automatically sent through our remote event so that the server knows which player fired it, but we also need to add in the reward ID, which is going to be a number, and this is what we passed in right here. This is I, this is the number of rewards that we're on. So if this was on the 12th version of this loop, this would fire through 12. And then we would want to check, can the player claim reward number 12? So the first thing we want to do here is stop any errors from happening because of an exploiter. And so we're just actually going to make sure that this reward ID is between 1 and 12. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if reward ID is less than 1 or if reward ID is greater than 12, then we're just going to return out of here. We're going to return end. Somebody passed a number through this that is not an accurate reward number, so we don't want to do anything. So now we just need to verify the reward, verify that the player can get the reward. So we're going to check if the player data of player user ID exists. Then we'll check if player data of that same player.userid has reward data of the specific reward ID. And then the last thing we'll check is we'll check if the player has already claimed reward. And if the player's already claimed the reward, we'll know they have because we've written that down here. So we'll say if player data of player.userid.rewards of reward ID, a lot of references going through here, of 1 equals true, then we're gonna again return end because 1 here is whether or not that player has cashed in this reward already. So in the case that they haven't, now we need to check if it's been enough time for the player to cash this reward. So the first thing we're going to do is find how much time is left on that reward before the player can cash it. We'll get the player data of this player's user ID. Dot rewards of reward ID of 2. And then we're going to do a little bit of math here in an if statement. We're going to say if os.time, so the current number of seconds, minus, I'm just going to copy this again, I don't want to type it out, minus the player data's login time, again this is in seconds. If this is greater than the time left on their reward, then we know that we can reward the player. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to grab this here, and we are going to set this to true. We're going to say, okay, we've rewarded. The first thing we're going to say is, yes, we've rewarded this player. So if they fire it through again with this reward ID, now it will end out right here. So we'll mark this reward as claimed. And for now, let's add a print statement also. We're going to say rewarding, and we are going to put the reward ID. So we can know when we're testing this out that it is rewarding us for something. So now we're actually going to give the player cash right here. This is where you could swap this out for your function. We'll say player data of player user ID dot money. So this is their money value. And then we're just going to add to it with that operator the reward info of this reward of 2. And if you remember up here, position 1 is storing how much time, position 2 is storing how much money they get. That was our format. So great, we've rewarded the player. Now we want to send back to the client that the reward was successful so that the client can change that button to not be looking for another click and to not confuse the player. So we're going to need to create a new remote event for this. So we'll create one in this UI folder, and we are going to rename this remote event to just update reward. Singular, we're just updating one reward here. So say remotes.ui.update reward, and then we'll fire to the client. We'll fire the reward ID that was checked, and we'll say true. Yes, it has been verified that this worked. And since the money is getting updated right here, let's also use that update money remote event to update the amount of money the player has. So fire through the player, and then this value right here, the player data.money. And that should be it for request reward. But if we were to go and play this, we wouldn't actually know when we can claim a reward because none of the timers are working yet on the player side. So the way we can know when we're ready to claim a reward as the player is to come back to this local script here, and we can remove this temporary table now. And then we can start a loop that updates all of the timer's texts. So whenever we're doing any kind of loop, we definitely want that at the very bottom here, because we want everything to get connected and set up before it enters into this loop, because this loop is never going to stop. So the way we're going to do this is by setting a local variable called t to 0, and this t is going to count up over time. And we'll say while true do, so forever it's going to do t plus equals 1, and then we'll say task.wait 1. So every second, t is going to go up by 1, and it'll effectively track how many seconds it's been since this script was created. So then right here, we're going to want to loop and update timer text and any other visual elements that we need here. To do this, let's create a new function. The purpose of this function is going to be to update button timers and their claim text. So we'll say local function loop update text, and we're going to pass in t, which is this number down here, and then we'll come down into this loop here and we will call that function loop update text, and we'll pass in t. So now in this loop update text function, we again want to loop through all of the reward info that we have so far. So we'll say for I info and I pairs reward info, what we want to do is first check if the timer should be running, and then we want to update that timer's text. Since this will be running every 1 second, we'll just set the text and set it again right in this function. That will make it look like the timers are ticking 1 second at a time. So we'll check if the timer should be running by actually just skipping the loop if the timer shouldn't be running. So the way we can do that is by checking if buttons of i.timer.text equals redeem, which we set earlier in the bulk update function, or if buttons of i.timer.text equals this checkmark emoji from earlier. And if it's either of those cases, then we just want to continue end because the button doesn't need to be counting anymore. So in this case, now we can just update the timer's text. Now in info here, we have the total number of seconds that we need to wait to claim the reward. And we also have from t here, the total number of seconds this script has been alive, basically. So what we can do right here is check if the script has been alive longer than the number of seconds that we need to wait, then we're going to set this button to its redeem state. If it hasn't, then we are going to update timer text here, set redeem state here. So to set the redeem state, well, we just want to change the timer's text. We want it to equal redeem like that. And then again, we also want to do a ready count here. We want to know how many buttons we have ready to be claimed at all times. And then we're going to copy this connection right here and paste it down here because now we're ready to redeem this button. Now, if it hasn't been enough time, we want the button's timer text to equal, something like 00, let's say it's 15 minutes and 36 seconds left. We want it to say that, right? But how do we format just a number of seconds into a string that looks like this? What we're going to do is create another function. And it was right up here. We had planned for this. We want to return a number of seconds in a readable format. So we're going to create this function now. We'll call this function format timer text. And what we're going to do is pass in the number of seconds that have elapsed and the total number of seconds we're waiting for. And then we're going to find the remaining number of seconds by saying remaining equals total minus elapsed. we're going to say the number of hours that are remaining is math.floor, round to the bottom, remaining divided by 3600, which is the number of seconds in an hour. The number of minutes that are left is going to equal math.floor. We are going to do remaining divided by, not divided by, the percent sign actually, 3600, and then we're going to divide this by 60. What this is this returns the remainder. So we know how many hours there are, but this will say maybe there's 3 hours left and 14 minutes. This will spit out the number 14, and then we'll divide that by 60 because that's how many minutes are going to be left in seconds. The number of seconds that are left, we're going to say local seconds, and that's just going to be remaining, this percent sign again of 60. And then what we're going to do is a simple check here also. So if hours is less than 1, then we don't want it to display an hours thing. But if hours isn't less than 1, we'll return something else. So now we're going to do a little string.format magic here. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You just kind of have to read the cheat sheet and plug in what you want here. But if you type in a string first, so parenthesis, percent sign, lowercase d, colon, and then what we're going to do here is another percent sign, a 0 to d, and then another parenthesis, and then drop a comma. A lot of weird characters here. Then we're going to type in comma minutes, right? And then seconds. This will return something formatted following these arguments, which will return it in a timer. But if hours is greater than 1, we want to return something else. So we're going to return string.format and an even crazier string here. So percent sign, lowercase d, colon, percent sign, 0 to lowercase d, colon, percent sign again, 0 to lowercase d. And then we're going to come over and drop a comma down here. Then we're going to put in hours, minutes, and seconds like that. This will return time in the correct way we want it. But now we can come all the way back down to this loop update text function. And instead of this, what we're going to do is we're going to say format timer text, t number of seconds have elapsed, and our total number of seconds is going to be info of 2. And now let's give this a look. So I've hit play here, and then if we open this up, you can see that if you formatted everything correctly, it is going to be counting down on each one of these buttons. That was a really gross format function that we just did there, but it does work. We can pass in the number of seconds, and it says how many seconds are left, and this updates every second and counts it on down. Okay, so we have a few more loose ends to tie up here before we're done with this rewards system. Coming back onto the server script here, we fired through this update reward remote event right here when we requested a reward and successfully completed it, but we're actually never listening to that on the local script. So we need to set up a function to listen to that and update the specific reward that has been completed. So we'll say remotes.ui.updateReward.onClientEvent. We're going to connect that to a new function which updates info for one reward up here. Thankfully, this is a pretty easy function to do here. We're just going to say local function update reward, and what we want to pass in is the reward ID of that reward and if it is claimed. Reward ID will be a number, this will be a Boolean, or true or false. So the first thing we're going to check is if this reward ID is valid by saying if buttons of reward ID exists. That's good. We're going to pass through, and if is claimed equals true. Then we're going to update the reward. We're going to update buttons of reward ID. So this is going to get the button of the reward that is being updated, and we're going to update the timer's text to this checkmark emoji right here. This is going to say, yep, you can't click this button anymore. And in this case, there's a few things to do here. We want to update claimed count, and we also want to do the ready count of how many buttons are ready to be cached in. And let's actually get going and set these right now, because we have a bunch of these to-dos all over the place. We have 2 right here, we have some down here, we have some all the way down here in this loop update text. So let's get going on that. Let's come up to the top here in our references area, and let's start by saying local ready count equals 0, because when the script starts, there will be 0 buttons ready to be claimed. and we'll say local claimed count also equals 0. So let's scroll back down to our to-dos here. So first to do on our claimed count, once this update reward gets fired and is claimed as true, we know that there's one more button that has been claimed. So we're going to say claimed count plus equals 1. So that just adds 1 to its total. And also we need to remove 1 from the ready count. So we're going to say minus equals 1 here because there's going to be 1 less ready. So we're going to scroll down to our next to-do. And this is checking if a button has already been claimed. So on this, we're going to say claimed count plus equals 1. Otherwise, at this other to-do, if there's a button ready to be claimed here, what this means is that the ready count plus equals 1. There is 1 button ready to be claimed. And what we're going to use this ready count for is in Pet Simulator, when you have a reward ready, it puts that little notification icon in the corner of the button, the one we created here earlier. Scrolling down a little bit farther to this last to-do, if we're setting the state of it to a redeemed state, then we also want to increment the ready count and do ready count plus equals 1. So now coming back up to update reward here, we have these claimed counts and these ready counts, but if we press play here, they don't actually do anything yet, even though if this counts down, it'll say ready, claim me right here, but this won't get changed to 1 here. So what we need to do is create one last function that is going to update this and update the text under this button. So here in the local script, just above update reward, let's create a new function here that updates the button visuals, those visual elements that we are tracking here with the claimed and ready counts. So we'll create a new function. We'll call this update visuals, and we don't need to pass in anything, but we can do a little safety check here because with ready count getting subtracted from so often, what can happen is that it could end up being less than 0. So if it's less than 0, then let's say ready count, we'll just set it equal to 0, and we'll end right there. Now if ready count does equal 0, since it's at 0, it might as well just not be there. So we'll say rewards button dot count dot visible equals false if ready count equals 0. And then we're also going to update the text underneath the button. So what we're going to do for that is first find the first counting down button that there is and just copy the text of that. So let's loop through all of the buttons we have. We'll say for I button in I pairs buttons. That's our big table of buttons that we have. We're going to do the following. We're going to check if the button button.timer.text does not equal redeem, and the button.timer.text does not equal our fun little checkmark emoji here, which we'll copy and paste. Then we know it is some kind of timer. So in that case, let's drop a comment here. We're going to set that button display to the found countdown. And then we're going to break because that we just want the smallest current countdown. Since we're looping from the bottom up of the buttons, it's really easy to do that and then just break out once we find one. So we'll set rewards button dot info dot text equals to the found button dot timer dot text. So that'll just copy that over. Then we'll come down here and we'll say else if ready count is greater than 0, then we want to show the player that rewards are available. We want the player to know so that way they can click on it. So here, now that we know the ready count is greater than 0, we're going to take the rewards button dot count dot visible equals true, and we are going to set the info text here to say ready, so they know, oh, there's a button ready, I don't have to wait anymore. And then right down here, we're just going to want to update this every time, no matter what, whether it's visible or not. We say rewards button dot count dot text equals ready count. The last visual element we can update here is this one right here. It says how many gifts are claimed, and this is why we're tracking the claimed count, because now what we can do is we can get the rewards window, and that was the description. Actually, that wasn't the description. What that was is rewards window dot claimed. So we'll say rewards window dot claimed dot text equals, and then we'll say it is equal to claimed count, concatenate it with the following out of 12 gifts claimed. Let's give this a look and see how it is. Okay, so everything's counting down here, but we have an error down here. Attempt to connect pass value is not a function. So let's take a look at that at line 143. Pretty simple error. Here's line 143. We just never passed in the update reward function. So we need to do that right here. And before I forget, whenever we update a reward, we also want it to update all rewards because we've incremented the ready count and the claimed count. So let's also just call update visuals just right on in here from this function. And because things can change pretty frequently, let's also call update visuals from down here in this 1 second loop. And let's play this again and see how it is. Okay, that's promising. So now we can see it's counting down right here on the outside of the button. And when we open it up, this countdown matches the lowest countdown that exists here in the window. And now that I've waited for that first reward to become available, you can see it says redeem here. It says ready on the gift icon out here, and this one notification has popped up letting me know I have one gift ready to be claimed. And if I click redeem, it redeems the gift. It tells me it rewarded me. This button changes back to a timer. The notification goes away, and this timer now matches the next lowest countdown. So that's perfect. Okay, now there's a few issues left here, namely with the data saving, because I've closed the game, and if I press play again, suddenly I'm on the first reward again, because we're not actually saving anything to data of what rewards we've already claimed for the day. So this way someone could just leave and come back and just keep claiming the rewards over and over again in one day, which we don't want. And the reason that's happening is because here in the server script, we actually aren't doing anything when the player leaves the game. This is where we need to save to the data store what the player has claimed already and how much time they have left on each claim. So here's the player leaves. Let's get a reference this time to their user ID. Let's say player.userid, because we're going to be calling into their data a lot. So we're going to finalize their data right here before we save it to the data store. We are going to say player data of user ID dot last login day. So whenever they log out, that's the last day they logged in. We're going to say math.floor os.time divided by seconds in a day is the last day that they logged in at. And then we'll say for I info in iPairs player data of user ID dot rewards. We want to do something with all of this data, and what we want to do is update the amount of time they have left to take into account how much time they've spent in the game. So we'll calculate time left here. Time left is going to be info of 2, and I think we're going to have to subtract how many seconds the player's been in the game for, which we can find by saying os.time minus the player data of user ID dot login time. So that's why we saved that right there. Now we can also check if time left is less than 0, then time left needs to equal 0 because end here, because we don't want a player to have negative seconds left on their countdown. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll set this back into the player's info. So we'll say info of 2 equals time left. Equal sign in there also, and now that the data has been finalized, we can save the player data right here. We can say local success error message equals pcall function. Whenever you're working with the data store, it's best to do these pcalls so you can get warned if something has gone wrong. And then we want to return the rewards data store set async. Same key here, player underscore concatenated with their user ID. And what we are going to set into that data value is the player's data that we've just finalized above. Now we can say if not success, then print, or no, let's warn so we can find it easily. Warn error message. So this will let us know what went wrong if we couldn't save it. And finally, in this player removing, we will set the player data of user ID to nil to save on memory. Otherwise, that can become a very small memory trickle where over time, this player data table that we have in the server script builds up as more and more players join and leave the game, and the memory can overflow eventually. So let's take a look in the game now. If we open this up and wait for this to count down, and now that it's counted down, I'll redeem this reward. I'll close this, and then I'll stop the game. And now that it's stopped, I'm going to press play again, and we'll see now when I load in, it says, oh, I've already played today, so this gift has already been claimed. This is the same behavior that Pet Simulator uses. A lot of games on Roblox just track from how long you've been logged in for. So this would be reset every single time. But Pet Simulator is a little bit more forgiving. It tracks throughout the day, so if you log on multiple times, you can make progress towards this last and best gift. Here's another one to redeem here, and now 2 out of 12 gifts have been claimed. But if I leave and come back, I don't get access to the ones I've already cashed in. Now checking the output, we can see it was rewarding me for the reward that I claimed, but nothing was happening here. I didn't actually see any reward coming through, although I should have. The reason that is because the money isn't set up here in the server up top when we update money here when the player joins, and also if we update money here to actually give me the cash that I get for staying in the game. Nothing has happened yet because we don't have a local script in the UI. Nothing in the UI is listening to this remote event. So we'll set that up as soon as we do one last thing here with this reward script. In Pet Simulator, you can see just while you're sitting there in the game doing whatever you're doing, that little present icon is just moving up and down and reminding you that it's there and reminding you that you have rewards on the way. So we're going to create a little tween that loops that just tweens that present up and down and makes it a little bit more interesting to look at and catches the eye a little bit. So we're going to come down here in the script right underneath where we've connected these events, but above this while loop, and I'll drop a comment here. We'll say Shakes reward present icon. So we'll get the present. The present is the rewards button dot present, and then we want a new tween info for this. So we'll say tween info dot new. The shake takes about a second. It moves pretty smooth. So we'll set this easing style to quad. We'll set the easing direction to out so that it starts slow and speeds up. And then if we set this repeat count here to -1, this will repeat infinitely. And so we can just play this tween and forget about it, and it'll just keep running forever. And we want it to reverse. We want it to bounce up and down. So let's create this tween now. We'll say the local tween equals tween service. Create the tween. It is going to be tweening the present object with the info we've created, and the value it's tweening is the position of this present. It's going to be tweening it to udim2.new, and the new position will be 0.5, 0, 0.4, 0. And then let's just play that tween. That should be all we need for this. So let's hit play and see this in action. So now over here we can see this present is just shaking up and down. It's pretty similar to the way Pet Simulator does it. And this is just going to remind the player, hey, there's rewards here. Click on me, see what's left. If you play for a little bit longer, you can get a new reward. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. I know it was really long, but I really hope this script can help you in your games and in the future. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and comment any videos you want me to make. I am always responding to comments, so I will see it if you comment it. Laters.